Hi, I'm Renny Hartman. I'm going to talk today about three Russian novels. This is not going to be too long, but the first one is Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace, which we can see is a monstrous book. I started to read it a few summers ago, and when I carried it around, people said to me all the time, "Oh, I read that in college." And I said to myself, "Oh, no, you didn't," because I think it took me 6 weeks to 2 months to actually finish. And the truth is, while I was reading War and Peace, I took a break from it a couple times and reread the Brothers Karamazov and Dr. Zhivago. But I will say of War and Peace, because it is considered a masterpiece and is Russian novel and kind of works because I read Victor Hugo's Les Miserables last summer. Hugo was very interested in not liking Napoleon. He was kind of satisfied with the fact that Napoleon didn't succeed at Waterloo, but he felt that Napoleon had kind of made France a real nation. A real nationhood came from Napoleon. Tolstoy is the Russian anti Napoleon because we have the war, we start in 1805, and then we have the war when Napoleon invades in 1812. And the novel concerns several families. The war is like a nutshell outside, kind of like the Titanic, where the loss of the ship is outside and the love story of the two young people is inside. And so the same way the framework works in War and Peace, the war is all around, and actually almost everybody after a while is involved in the war. But we have several families, almost all aristocrats, princes for the most part, inside, and how they develop their wives, their young ladies, their girlfriends, the people that they grow up with, and people that they match. And there is one character, Pierre, who is almost in all the major plot elements. He is an illegitimate child of the richest prince in the Russian Empire when it was still Tsarist. We're talking about the late 1700s, early 1800s. And he ends up being the heir, which is a shock to him. He's not a very sophisticated person or a very self-involved person to begin with. He becomes much more so as the novel progresses, and he is almost in every major situation that anybody should be in that draws the novel together. He makes a very bad marriage to a very wild woman, a princess, when he first marries. And then later in the book, Tolstoy lets him have a nice marriage and a finished marriage and a happy marriage at the end. He survives the war. We go through too many of the characters who don't survive. And we see the big battles like Borodino and Austerlitz. It was like reading Waterloo in Les Mis. Interesting, very historical. And at the end, Tolstoy himself writes that he was very interested in making this history, not just fiction and not just a novel, but the history itself. Now, some criticisms say that the character of Pierre is Tolstoy himself, kind of an alter ego. I don't know enough of Tolstoy to say whether that's true or not. I don't think Pierre is really a wonderful character because he was not raised well and didn't feel part of society, and so he has this detachment that doesn't make him fit into a tremendous number of situations. He does, however, make himself known to himself and develops himself much better as he goes on, and he's in some difficult situations. He's in Moscow when Napoleon occupies Moscow, and he's on the list to be executed. He's not executed because Tolstoy saves him. And he does, of course, finish the novel and does well at the end of the novel. This, of course, is considered an absolute masterpiece, and I would say you need the time to address it. I took time to address it, and in between, I went back to two other Russian novels that I had already read. One of them was the Brothers Karamazov. This is actually my copy from college. I loved this novel. I actually wrote a poem that came from this novel. There is a chapter in the Brothers Karamazov on religion and involves the Inquisition in Spain and the Grand Inquisitor. Alyosha, who is very religious in the novel, is very concerned because he believes that religion is removing Christ from his position in Christianity. And the Grand Inquisitor says, well, we're not interested in Christ anymore. We have our own version. So I have my own poem, The Grand Inquisitor. I do not claim to madness, but if Edward Lear speaks at my window, does that qualify? Black, no doubt, had grander guests. And on the other hand, I am quite close to catching Dostoevsky sneaking in and out of his pages. I'll put him in a gilded box. So when they come, candles over monographs, great flaming words of definitive interpretation, the doors will fly away and faint. Back to the ball I yield, Yossarian sitting in the African violets, déjà vu, and Johnson dining at my desk. Let them plead with their eyes of bullion. Seeing Dante grin is worth half the chance. What is fortune to me? Give them the rest. Then the light is too frightening in the dark. Loneliness, too, is occupation. Except one word from myself, the Grand Inquisitor remained until the end. But I did not like the Brothers Karamazov rereading it in my great old age. Dostoevsky is very modern in the sense he was interested in the development of crime and evil, how people perpetuated what they did, and freedom. Did crime come from our freedom? If we are free and we aren't responsible to anybody, can we then do anything we want? And will that be evil? The Brothers Karamazov is considered a book in realism, although I found rereading the book was wildly melodramatic. Was written in the 1870s. Dostoevsky actually had it published towards the end of his life. He did not exist long afterwards. It's set in the 1850s. I think it's wildly romantic. We have the father who is not a good person and has not really raised his sons. And then we have his three sons, Dmitri, Ivan, and Alexei, who's Alyosha. And we have a fourth son who's illegitimate, who actually does become a criminal and does kill the father, but the son, Dmitri, the oldest son, actually goes to jail because of the death of the father, although they can solve that towards the end. But I found the yelling and screaming and shouting and disliking of people throughout the novel and going back and forth and having tremendous numbers of arguments and dislikes, not attractive. I cannot say why I thought this novel was so fantastic exactly in college. I thought it was marvelous, but I thought it was maybe overwritten. I would not say War and Peace is too long, but I would say the Brothers Karamazov today might be what I would say is a little bit overwritten, although the novel on the religious elements are really wonderful. Alyosha goes to a monastery and he's very interested in religion. We have a tremendous amount of religious discussion that is very interesting in the book, but I don't think it speaks to us in a modern way quite in the way that I thought it did maybe 50 years ago. Also, while I was reading War and Peace, I went back and took a break and I reread Dr. Zhivago by Boris Pasternak, and I would say everyone should get a copy and read this book. This is set in the Russian Revolution, like War and Peace, like Gone with the Wind, like the movie Titanic, we have the outside revolution in the 1917, 1918, 1919, and the First World War in Dr. Zhivago. In War and Peace, we have the Napoleonic War. In Les Mis, we have also Napoleonic Wars, and we have revolution in France. But then the fictional part are the characters inside that are developed. And in this, Zhivago is a young man who's a doctor who becomes a famous poet in the Russian Tsarist area just before the revolution. When the revolution comes, he is not one of the revolutionaries. And to save him, his half-brother, who is a Bolshevik, helps to send him out into the countryside to save himself. There is a double love story because Zhivago is in love with a cousin that he does marry and begins to have his family with, but he also falls in love with a young woman named Lara, and she becomes the passion of his life, and he writes Lara poems that also become famous. And Zhivago has been adapted gorgeously into a 1965 movie that is absolutely perfect to go along with reading the book. The movie does for itself some things that even the book doesn't do. The movie does a candle in the window as a theme for Lara, the balalaika as the theme for the artists. And I can't say that they come from the book, but they are done very, very well in the movie. And I would strongly recommend reading Zhivago, not only for the Russian Revolution, which was strong in its time, unfortunately killed tens of millions of people as it progressed, and is now, thankfully, in many ways has gone from Russia, although Russia does some autocratic material today. Russia's always been autocratic because the Tsarists were autocratic, and actually the communist leaders were autocratic, and now Putin and whoever is ruling there is also autocratic. But Zhivago will give you this wonderful breadth of the country, and the description of the people in the country, and the description of the cities in the country, that I think come wonderfully and beautifully alive, so that they seem absolutely real, as if you could really see a person like this walking on the street. The fiction is so strong, the development actually seems as if we're talking about real existence rather than something that has been created by the imagination. I suggest everybody read all three of the novels. Maybe you don't want to read them all at once or all at the same time, but I would very strongly suggest that Russian novels are really fascinating materials, and Tolstoy and War and Peace, of course, is considered one of the great masterworks of Russia. So is Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, and Pasternak's Dr. Zhivago was written underground in Russia originally because the writer was not agreeable with the communist government, and they wouldn't let him publish. The novel was first published outside in the 50s in Italy, and later was published in the 80s in Russia after the so-called revolution and the communists started to completely fall apart. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy reading Russian literature.